This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. And today I am joined by teaching elder Doug Serven. Doug, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Great. I'm glad to be on here. Thank you, Ryan.
Oh, well, my pleasure. And you've just gotten back from an anniversary trip to France, as I understand. You feeling well rested?
Yes, I had a great trip. It's our 30th anniversary. We did it all up. And so now I'm in recovery mode physically, but also like email-y and getting yourself back in the track. So I think I'm about there. It's been a week back, so I'm good.
Great. Well, thanks for making time. I know that first week back is brutal. And I only travel domestically, so I can't imagine. Well, give me a little bit of your professional background, your ministry background. How did you come to be serving in the PCA?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Southwest Missouri in a small town. I grew up Methodist. I was there every single Sunday. Went to college at the University of Missouri for journalism, and I think my freshman year I came to Christ.
Mm,
I'll be interested to find out what Jesus has to say about that actual timing
yeah.
through the ministry of the Navigators, which I really appreciated. And so then I went on staff with the Navigators at the Oklahoma State University. And it was sort of in those 4 years where I discovered Reformed theology and started reading more and more. I started taking some classes at Covenant by tape, back in the day. And then I eventually went to Covenant in 1997, graduated in 2000, and I went and planted or started the RUF campus ministry at the University of Oklahoma. I did that for 10 years, and then I planted City Presbyterian Church in Oklahoma City. I did that for 10 years, and now I'm in Baltimore, of all places.
Wonderful. Um, so you started an RUF chapter. That's that's impressive work.
That was fun times for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. And you have been doing some work on the Elizabeth Mackintosh case. 34 years ago, a brilliant student at the seminary in her final semester, brutally murdered at the seminary. You've said on another podcast, you devoted a lot of effort and time to thinking about how to raise awareness of this situation. How did you first get interested in this injustice?
Okay, Ryan, when did you find out about the murder?
Let's see. I found out I was in at RTS, so it's probably 2010 that I knew that there was a student murdered at Covenant Seminary, and that was about it. I knew that, and it was unsolved.
Yeah,
But it was something that, and other podcasts have talked about this too. That wasn't really something to talk about, not because there
sure.
was a censorship, at least at RTS, but it was
No,
just that's kind of that's a Covenant thing. Don't go bringing that up. But
right.
I've talked about it with Covenant grads, and they said they had a different experience, that it was just something that there was some sort of social pressure not to talk about. Not that the administration was doing anything. But so I found out about it in 2010, I would guess.
Sure, which is normal and fine. We all find about it out about it different times. I went from 97 to 2000. I think I found out about it like in 2001 or 2.
Okay, so after you graduated.
Yeah, so it's this thing, and this is a part of the waters,
Yeah.
is it's not easy to talk about. I don't
No.
really begrudge Covenant for not splashing it all over
Right.
their prospective students packets. But it is a bit weird or disconcerting when you've been there for so long and then you find out about it afterwards. And that's pretty common. I even have a buddy. We were together in Pittsburgh because we were there for Albert Pujols and Yadier Molina's last games on the roster for St. Louis. And I'd already been involved in this podcast, right? And he's Covenant grad from early 2000s, grew up in St. Louis, and I was talking about the podcast, and he had never heard about it. This is 2022.
Hmm.
So I don't really know exactly the way you should talk about it,
Right.
but so for me, I have tried to be somewhat, however, fallible, a voice for people that maybe don't always have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like white PCA pastors really have a voice. Being a pastor is a very hard job. It's not easy in any sense. But there's so many people in our congregations and midst that don't have voices or don't have the same platform. And so I have just tried, again, imperfectly, to try to let people speak on their own behalf. The trick about that is you don't always get to curate what they say.
Yeah. And you
Right.
you do you still have your podcast, or has that gone a little bit dormant?
Okay, wait. Let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah.
But so Elizabeth is a little bit of a sense of an extreme example of
Yeah.
someone who certainly doesn't have a voice,
Right. Right.
who should be known and remembered, I think, in a way more respectful way.
Mm.
And so it has just gnawed on me over the years.
Yeah.
And then it really sort of grew during COVID, whereas like seems sort of ridiculous. We've got to do more than chit chat about it over beers or on Facebook. And so that was sort of the gnawing, like this woman should be known in the world and in the PCA and in Covenant Seminary. And so let's talk about her like we sort of say we should. So that's, I think you asked, how did I get interested in this case? We can come
Yeah.
back to the
Yeah.
podcast, but
Yeah. Because you trying to give a voice to people in your podcast. I know you would interview a number of folks throughout the PCA to let them talk. But yeah, we can talk about that later. So you were at the seminary about 7 years after she was murdered. And they said you didn't find out about it until a year or two after she graduated. Um, but you were until recently a member of the seminary board. How was that experience?
oh, wonderful. Loved it. Grateful to be on the board. Love Covenant Seminary.
Yeah, yeah. I think though on one of the True Believer episodes you said, or maybe it was one of the ladies on there, that you were not the first choice of Covenant Seminary, but sounds like you had a good time on the board and a productive tenure as a board member.
Yeah. Well, all that means is, there's nominating committee
Yeah.
and somebody nominated me and, every institution sort of likes to like know what they're getting,
Yes. Yes.
which is reasonable. And I sort of popped out of nowhere and I didn't ask to do it. And I got voted in and they're like, what the heck? Not in a bad way, not in a bad way. But so, so, I don't know if you know this, Ryan, a teeny bit of a wild card. You might be too.
Yeah, we probably both are.
So, yeah, like seminary boards don't always like wild cards per se. But I feel like it was a good run. I helped. I loved being a part of it. It was during a transition from Mark Dalby to Tom. And, there's a lot of changes going on in seminaries
Yeah.
and in the PCA, and it's hard to navigate.
Hmm.
And I was super grateful to lend whatever I could to help.
Yeah. Yeah. So was it while you were on the board that you started investigating more proactively to try to piece together what you could?
Yeah, I think I got on the board maybe in 2019. I don't know, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And then I really started working on this more in 2020.
Hmm.
So there were overlapping years of working on it and being on the board.
Yeah. And one of the things that was mentioned about your time on the board on the True Believer podcast was that you couldn't serve on the board and investigate at the same time. And I was just that kind of piqued my interest because I thought, well, wouldn't it wouldn't this be something the board would want to have done and have a board member involved in any investigation? So did you get pushback officially from doing that investigation, or was that a personal feeling that it was just improper to be part of the board in doing this?
Well, you'd have to ask them. But I think we eventually mutually agreed that it was a
Mm.
tension point, at
Oh,
least.
really?
I think it could have been very beneficial, but it didn't end up seeming that way. And so it seemed better for me to like step off and let them do their thing and I could do my thing. So there wasn't any conflict of interest in any sense.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't speak for Covenant Seminary's
No,
board.
no.
I don't speak for Covenant Seminary. They have their own ideas and policies, and I have my own. And so, I just don't want to be in conflict with Covenant.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like Covenant has taken a different path to this than you might, and that many of their alumni wish that they would have. And I don't know that we can fault the seminary for that, because it's
Hmm.
kind of a no-win. No matter what you
Sure.
do, people are going to criticize you. I mean,
Right.
I graduated from RTS Jackson, and certainly the most infamous graduate that we
Yeah.
have is Paul Hill,
Yeah.
who murdered an abortionist. And the way the seminary handled that was they kept his graduation photo up, and in the Torah class, Genesis to Deuteronomy class, the instructor used him as an example of, do not apply this theology. This is what our alumnus did, and that was wrong. And I could imagine people giving grief to the seminary for acknowledging him in any way, but for RTS, that was how they chose to deal with a difficult uh, situation, by owning the graduate and teaching against his theology. Now, in this case, obviously it's an unsolved murder.
Right.
But do you get the sense that there's a reluctance to talk about this is somewhat generational? And now, I think your daughter's about my age, so we're in a different generation. But it seems like the younger generation is more apt to talk about this, whereas some of the older and maybe wiser are reluctant to talk about
How
this
old are
issue.
you? How old are you?
I am, oh man, 36, I think.
Yeah. So Ruth is 29. I'm
Okay.
53. We're really talking somewhat about boomers. And we could talk about boomers for a long time.
And we love boomers.
We love boomers, and boomers will never give up, ever. So they're just going to skip over Gen X, and hopefully they'll land on y'all.
Oh,
But so, yeah, I mean, so the way it works is there's a generational and institutional memory,
yes.
and it it sort of makes sense when you realize, like litigationally and um, PR and stuff like that, that we sort of continue to carry on a way to go. And the way to go is, this is an ongoing investigation, so we don't have anything to do with it. We try to participate willingly, happily. But other than that, we don't really communicate about it unless asked by the police or maybe a news source,
Right.
which I think is very understandable. But I think inside, to me, the problem and the tragic problem is that mindset carried over to her as a
Hmm.
person on in a way that didn't matter um, with the police or the reporters. So like that thought process of like, okay, hands off. It's not that we won't talk about it, but we're not trying to. So this eventually is the thing that grieved me the most, just sort of got me off my duff at least, is, and we talk about this in the podcast, is like no plaque, no memorial, no scholarship, nothing.
Not even a bench,
Yeah, if you would have
a
done a bench
tree.
the year after, but now like we're way past a bench, yo.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking this has got to be something, because when we honor someone, we do something.
Right.
And there's a sense where like I guess it doesn't matter how much we spend, but in some sense like yeah, we didn't just like buy a book or
Mm-hmm.
get flowers. So I think we're sort of the point of like we have not done anything, and I understand why. It's a weird schizophrenia. Like I understand why that happened, and I can't believe we're still here.
Mm. Yeah, this was 34
Um,
years ago.
but like when you on the 5 year anniversary, 1995, 2000, 2005,
Yeah.
2010, 2015, 2020. So like all along the way, it's like no one ever thought. I mean, it's just sort of crazy, but it's sort of part of the institutional way we're doing this. No one ever thought we should do something for her on these anniversaries. Seems to me not the Covenant way to handle
Hmm.
things.
And I
But
like the way you put that this is out of a love for the seminary. This isn't a hostility toward
hmm,
Covenant or trying to discredit the seminary. This is out of a love for the seminary that you have as your alma mater, uh, to want the seminary to do what you believe, and I think a number of alumni believe is the right thing to do for her legacy
well, and I
and
think
her.
it's separate from the police. I think it's separate
Oh
from the
yeah,
media. It's internally, and that way, I think you don't have to broad. So maybe every 5 years you have a service and you talk about her for 5 minutes, or you ring the bells, or yearly you ring the bell. There's something where you can say like, yeah, we didn't talk about this all the time, but we didn't talk about it never, and
right.
you could encounter this tragedy, and we understand a way, maybe not the best way, but a way to acknowledge it, um, name it, lament it,
Yeah.
and have it be a part of this place where we say there's great joy and great sorrow. But
Hmm.
Jesus is in charge of all of that.
Yeah.
And so I sort of think that's the understandable mistake. Again, like, I see how it happened. And I'm not a prophet, or I don't like being, I know this sounds crazy, but I don't like being controversial. But it just seems like this is something that should happen.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, what would you like to see the PCA do, within her spheres and her power? I mean, she can't. The church can't bring a murderer to justice, so to speak. But
Right.
what would you like to see happen at Covenant, or as the PCA as the parent institution?
Well, good question. Uh, I do, Ryan, tend to think this is a little bit of an exemplar about how we, the PCA, treat women. I don't want to overstate that. I think it's a bit of it, especially outspoken ones who don't necessarily fit the mold. She did fit the mold in a lot of ways. So I think what the PCA should do, so we're already moving that direction. We're talking about her.
Yeah.
That hadn't happened before. I hope that everybody in the PCA knows who she is and knows that, this isn't a true crime podcast. This is about telling her story and the other
Right.
people who've been affected by this story. And I do believe this is a traumatic story that has ripples and waves over
Hmm.
a lot of things, even unconsciously,
Hmm.
but not intentionally. So that's a part of the problem. So like getting her back out in the PCA at all is great. And then institutionally doing something at Covenant Seminary, I certainly think a memorial and a scholarship and day of remembrance would be completely appropriate and should happen ASAP. Yeah,
Right.
I think we should all pray for justice. My opinion is that people know things that have never been asked, and those um, remembrances have never really been mined, which no one has the complete time and space to do that. I don't really begrudge that.
Right.
So,
Right.
but right now, TJ and Ruth know more about this than any people in the planet.
Any two individuals, certainly. They've
No one
talked to.
knows more about this than TJ and Ruth.
I'm certain of that.
And so we are trying to at least create a record of what actually happened instead of all the myths and rumors and, you know, stories over beers and misinformation that if anyone knows something, and the thing is, you might know something and you might think it's unimportant. The police didn't ask you. Well, they didn't ask everyone, right? They don't have unlimited time and power.
Hmm.
Seminary didn't ask. They didn't know to ask you about this thing. So if people have memories or thoughts, they should come in to the two people who know the most about this. So at least there can be as best it can be, the most comprehensive record we've ever had. That's the only chance ever this will ever be solved.
And
I
I was
Now we're
I was
not
doing
trying to
some.
solve it, but
Right.
it's the best chance it would ever be solved, and at least people can talk about what they know to people who will listen and care and not be dismissed.
And also to clear the names possibly even of some folks who have been
Sure.
suspects. And that was one thing that I don't remember if it was on when I was talking with your daughter, if it was just something she mentioned on the podcast, um, that there have been significant storylines that have been shared widely that based on the research and the compilation of witnesses that they've done, that is inaccurate, that was speculation, that was exaggeration, that person could not have done it. And I don't know enough to even know what she was talking about, because you know I heard one person tell me about this in 2010, and then probably didn't think about it until late 2023 when the preview for the podcast came out.
Right.
um, but are you considering anything through the church courts, an overture, or some have said, well, the seminary board should lead on this, and others have said, well, the seminary board works for the General Assembly, so the General Assembly should lead on this. Have you considered an overture?
There's an overture from Chesapeake Presbytery that basically just honors her and asks for prayer. I don't
Great.
know what any other overture could really accomplish.
Sure.
I
So
mean,
there's one coming, though.
there is one coming
Good.
to spend 1 minute in prayer for her in General Assembly. I would hope that would pass because it's not a memorial. So we sort of ban memorials, but a
Right. Right.
memorial is when you laud
Yes.
somebody's
accomplishments and
achievements, and you
yeah,
talk about it for whatever 2-3 minutes. This is just saying, whereas Elizabeth was murdered, whereas we have a God of truth and love and mercy, and whereas we have a God of justice, let's pray for 1 minute.
for
Now, I'd
justice.
like
Yeah.
to pray for an hour. I don't think
But
that would go.
in the in a church court that may not be the most expedient use of time. But
Of
yeah,
course,
I like yeah.
but
So
at
your
least we
presbytery
get
has sent that
her.
up already.
Well, at least we get her in the public record
Yeah.
of the courts, which is a very Presbyterian solution to something.
That's
But
once it's in
I
the record,
mentioned,
it's solved, right? In the Presbyterian mindset.
well,
We
like I've conflicted feelings about that, but
yeah.
her father was the stated clerk of a Presbyterian
Yeah.
denomination in Scotland, and so that was a bigger deal over there than it is here. So
Certainly.
I do think it would honor him to have her in the record, and that we take a minute to pray for her justice, albeit far late. At least it's not never. So I would
Mm-hmm.
hope that that would seems pretty simple and uncontroversial, except that probably most people still don't even know about this,
Yeah.
is my
Yeah.
guess. So that is that a solution? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean that's what the church can do, though. We can name things after people. We can pray. We can spread upon the minutes as as the language goes. But that's what we can do. And I think a lot of the grief that I've heard from folks attached to Covenant Seminary or graduates is we haven't done anything,
Yeah.
and it's the silence that is speaking volumes in this situation.
Do you have thoughts about what we could do?
I like that idea. I mean, I a friend and I, we drafted an overture. We got it together after my presbytery met, and I didn't think that it was appropriate to call a meeting for this since there were other presbyteries that were meeting between then and the deadline. And we suggested, name the student union or the student center or a portion of it, after her. Or and others have said a scholarship or a tree and a I don't know that it so much matters. I don't want this to sound crass, but I don't know that it matters what we do, so long as we do something.
Yeah.
I mean, the whether it's room 112B or what I don't know that so much matters. That's what I mean. But just that something is done and said.
Well, and I think Covenant needs to do it. I don't think Covenant needs to be directed by the General Assembly to do it. They just need to do it. And I
Yeah,
think they will do it. It's a busy, obviously crazy time, and they have other
sure.
things going on. So, but I don't know that we need an overture to direct them to do that. They
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that,
yeah, and
at least by
and
now.
sure, and our intent and we just put the overture out on a Substack and said anybody can use this, can adapt it, however. But here's just essentially a placeholder for someone whose presbytery meets within the deadline. I think ours had met 2 weeks before,
Yeah.
and we got it up, and there just wasn't time. But this one of the things I saw, kind of switching gears, that I think it was your daughter posted on social media that some people within the PCA are trying to use the project that you and your daughter and TJ are working on to make political points in the PCA, which I think is horrible. Have you noticed that people are trying to turn this into a political club? Uh,
Well, Ryan, of course.
man,
You know, this is shocking. Not everybody likes me. I know that's hard to realize. Also, not everybody likes Brian Chappell and Paul Koistra and Covenant Seminary and Mark Dalby and now Tom Gibbs.
hmm,
So it is very possible to say, like, Covenant, you're doing a wrong thing. We've been having a hard time figuring out how to get you on stuff. Now we can try to get you on this. And of course, I think that's abysmal and
yeah,
terrible and
yeah,
um,
yeah,
awful beyond belief.
right, yeah,
Now, well, I mean, I have my own opinions about it, but it's not
Sure.
political to me. But I just don't think honoring Elizabeth should be any part of any of that.
I agree, and that's what struck me by what was posted online, is that I haven't seen anyone doing that. I've seen people wanting to honor Elizabeth, but there was some of the people that were interviewed in one of the recent episodes of the True Believer podcast. I was, the things that they were saying about uh, Clerk Chappell and former coordinator Koistra, former President Koistra, and I was feeling bad for them, that it was just so brutal in the things that were said about them. And I don't always agree with either of them, but
Well, it's
man, my
hard to
heart
be a
was going,
leader. It's
right,
hard to be
yeah,
a leader.
yeah,
It's not easy to make decisions. Not everyone's going to like your decision.
yeah.
You want to be president? Go for it. And everyone's going to hate you, right?
Here's the target to sew on your back, so they know where to stick the knives when
So
you become
the
president.
easiest thing to be is not president. To
Yeah,
talk about how terrible the president is doing. When you
exactly.
actually got to be president, guess what? It's not easy.
Yeah.
We all pastored churches over the COVID. That wasn't easy, right? So
Yeah.
just making decisions. I'm super sympathetic to anyone who's trying to make decisions. So I don't want to, you know, Monday quarterback stuff, but it's all in our inclination to always do that.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, we have our PCA fights and internal battles, which always think is mostly silly. But I don't want to use Elizabeth in any sense to have anything
Absolutely
to do with
not.
any of that.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I just haven't seen, now, I'm not omniscient, but I just haven't seen people trying to do that, to score points, which would be, and I hope people don't take
Good.
this episode in that way, but that would be entirely inappropriate.
Right.
Because
Thank you.
no one has anything to gain, from trying to, at least I would hope there's nothing to be gained, by trying to score points on this. Um, as you said, it was not, there was no way for them to to win in whatever course of action they took. And to hear, it sounds like Paul Koister, was trying to pastor, the main
Yeah,
suspect, through his time at the end of the seminary. Even going over to his house for meals. I mean, that,
it was very difficult. Very difficult.
yeah, yeah. Um, well, switching gears, Elizabeth is not the only person to whom you've tried to give, a voice or raise awareness for. You produce media for the PCA crowd. How did that interest you? You have a degree in journalism, as I understand it.
Yep. So Ryan, when did you start going with the bow tie?
Probably probably 2009.
Yeah.
I think that's when I learned how to tie a bow tie. No, 2008, because it was the retirement, party for my, pastor in college. It was 2008.
And so is this a frequent look for you?
Yes, not as frequent as it used to be. In Mississippi, it's about 50% bow tie, but now that I'm in Georgia, it's a little bit less bow tie.
Nice. And you tie them yourself. I would do
I
clip
do.
on.
What's that?
That's I would do clip on, but that's uncool.
I can't do clip on. Yeah,
Clip on,
yes.
yeah. Well, it
Somebody.
looks good. Okay, so so I've always been a journalism major. I'm I have ADHD. I'm all over the place. So in 2020, I had nothing to do. I don't even know what I did. I I always say in 2020 I made plans and canceled them.
Hmm,
I wrote emails and didn't send them. I would write
hmm,
15 emails and not send any of them. So I was going crazy. Now, this was also, I don't know if you remember, the PCA is going downhill faster than ever. The PCA is completely going liberal. The PCA, the sky is falling in the PCA. We are in trouble. I never thought that was true. I don't think that's true. I still don't think that was true. I think that was a false narrative. Very problematic, actually. So this was an attempt to, you know, lightheartedly talk about things in the PCA that aren't terrible, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
So we started having people on. Now, I obviously curated these people. I will say, if we do an episode, season 3, I'm going to try to have other voices that maybe disagree with my take on the PCA. But the first 2 seasons were pretty much who I wanted to talk to or who Justin wanted to talk to. I didn't know everybody that we talked to, but it's, an hour of pretty lighthearted banter about how the PCA is okay, what we're doing, what's going on. And then, I think it's semi serious because we're trying to tell people stories about what they're doing. But then there's
Mm-hmm.
this certainly, I mean, I feel like you're trying to do something serious, which is great. My was like, whoa, we always take ourselves too seriously. So, like, that's when, of course, I had unlimited time. I wasn't spending money on anything. So I made these crazy, idiotic theme songs and
I
music.
remember some of those.
Oh, they're
Those were
so
funny. I thought they were funny.
stupid.
Some people thought they were just the end of the world, but I thought, at least, one or two that you sent me, I thought it was funny. I was like, you know,
Well,
and
yeah,
and
I
and
mean,
and we're on the different ends of the spectrum on a lot of things.
well,
But
I'm
I thought it
glad you
was
thought they
funny.
were funny because
I
they
thought they
were
were funny.
funny.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, whatever, yo. Let's not take ourselves so seriously. It's sort of my weird sort of sabotage against the seriousness of everybody doing everything in bow ties and whatever.
Bow
Just
ties and
kidding.
seersucker, right?
Just kidding. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Seersuckers. So, it ends up to be a fairly lighthearted interview process. We probably did what, 40, 50 of them, and we pretty much had a good time. Um, it's not journalism; it's just talking, but it gave me like stuff to do, honestly.
And
And
people
like,
media to consume.
well, and yeah, so like a little bit of anti the sky is falling, a little rebellion against that narrative
Mm-hmm.
without calling it out per se
Right.
is what I sort of was in my mind. Now, like, there were certainly times I was mad about other things, and I sometimes that might have crept in, and I'm sorry about that. But yeah, it wasn't any great journalistic endeavor like this podcast is for sure. The True Believer podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. They are doing. Um, I can't imagine because I know how much effort it takes to produce a podcast with 2 guys or 3 guys or 4 guys just talking. But what
Yeah.
they're doing
Oh, totally different.
is I mean that Ruth, I think, posted the other day on social media. By the way, this isn't my full time job, but
Oh gosh.
it really must be consuming at least 20 hours a
Oh,
week.
thousands, thousands, thousands of hours. Sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And like iHeart PCA
Yeah.
consumed fives of hours. Not
Yeah.
0 hours, but I needed something to do and it was sort of fun and yeah, I hope people got a informative chuckle.
Hmm. Yeah. And there's a place for that. I mean, that.
Yeah, I don't think we should fight near as much. So
Yeah. I think David Cassidy called them food fights in the PCA.
that seems
And
silly to me.
yeah. Yeah. Um, so how do you how did you, and you also publish books, I think, you publish for other people. How do you, it seems like you just, one of the thing, a passion that you seem to have is giving people, uh, of producing media, a voice, as you call it.
Right. Yeah. So the first book we did was Heal Us Emmanuel, and that was connected to the racial reconciliation overture, right? And so if you remember, it came up as a personal emotion, and then it got tabled for a year, and then we talked about it again, and maybe the second time was in Chattanooga. I don't exactly remember where we
I
were.
think Ligon Duncan made the motion in Chattanooga, and then it came back in Mobile.
Okay, right. Yeah, I had a lot of oysters in Mobile. So in the intervening year, I thought, well, let's. People have written about these things. This isn't the first time. So I just started gathering other people's already written stuff. And I had a publisher, and then he sold his company like in January. And I realized we had to do it ourselves. So we published that book, and that sort of got me started in trying to help, especially PCA pastors, PCA women, PCA women of color to get out there because they wouldn't normally get published by a traditional or even niche publisher.
Mm-hmm.
So it is connected to I want your voices to be heard. Now, I think our PCA voices should be heard. I think they're amazing voices. But again, I don't agree with everything everybody says. So, like, when
Right.
you give over to people say, I get criticism back. It's like, ah, I didn't say it. Well, you shouldn't have
Yeah.
published it. I don't think that's fair. I think people get to say what they want and deal with the consequences, and I'll deal with their consequences. And of course, I give feedback and pushback and whatever. So it's been, oh yeah, like 10 years maybe. We've done quite a lot of books, and I'm mostly proud of the ones for the people that would have never got published anywhere else.
Mm. Yeah, you raise a point that people, they criticize this program, that they criticize the podcast that you're helping with, True Believer, for allowing certain perspectives and certain opinions. How do you, as a publisher, where do you draw the line where, where someone says, and you're reading it or you're hearing it, and that people are not going to like that perspective. Where do you draw the line to say, I'm going to cut that, or I'm not going to publish this work at all, or is there anything between where you just let them say what they're
Oh,
going to
sure.
say?
No, no, no. Oh, I wouldn't just publish anything anybody says.
Yeah.
It has to be in the ballpark. But there are things that people say that ruffle feathers that probably should get ruffled.
Mm.
Um, but, heresy and accusations but like if you're a single black woman in the PCA, you might have a different perspective than you and me. So you should get to talk about that.
Mm.
If that doesn't mean you're being, I don't think necessarily disrespectful. It means you're trying to be heard, and maybe you haven't been heard. So yeah, it's certainly a judgment call, and
Yeah.
I tend to defer to the person because I don't want to gaslight people,
Right.
or none of us would want to, but I don't agree with everything everyone says, but I can live in a universe where that's okay.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
Right.
it doesn't bother me too much to have some gray areas in all this.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
it bothers me some to have other, so I'm not just whatever,
Right. Right.
but I
Yeah.
try to be respectful for the voices. We don't have to have everything buttoned down exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of bring it in for a close, where would you like to see, we just celebrated our 50th anniversary as the PCA. Where would you like to see the PCA in 25 years? What does the PCA look like in 25 years? uh, or what would you like it to look like? What does faithfulness look like?
Are you going to answer first?
Yeah, I would
It's a
like to
big
see.
question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No one's ever asked me that on this show. um, yeah, I would like to see the PCA become, more faithful, more holy, more peaceful, more committed to the means of grace, word, sacrament, prayer, more zealous for evangelism, and to hold fast to that faith once for all delivered in a world that is so desperately in need of the joy of the gospel. I'd like to see us looking back at our 75th and say, wow, the aspirations of our founding fathers have just blossomed. Our founding fathers, they of course, they all had their problems, or at least the vast majority of them did. Maybe there was one who was perfect. I don't know. But, they all had their problems, but in the those crooked sticks, look at what the Lord has done with the PCA now 75 years later, and how faithful she is to the scriptures and the Reformed faith and the Great Commission.
Well, it's hard to fault that answer. So I wholeheartedly agree. Except I think we're doing that.
Hmm.
So, like, more doing that is hard for me to imagine because I think we're doing it. So, I think we're growing and we have great ministries and great churches. The big problem I see is infighting
Mm. Yeah.
and backbiting and accusation making. So what I would hope is that we would like, okay, listen, yo, we are all conservative, reformed Presbyterians in the PCA. You don't get more conservative reform than that. Conservative reformed. So can we just do it and be okay with each other? It feels like right now, no, we can't.
Yeah.
And that to me is the most biggest problem is like pinpointing the things we disagree with, but we sort of agree that we can do it different ways within the umbrella of who we are. We all
Yeah.
agree to the confession, we all agree to the standards, we all agree to the basic order of worship. I mean, I don't think there's any church that doesn't. Now, there's probably blips along the way, and those people eventually get called out and maybe leave, which is the way the process works.
Yeah.
So I just think there's a little bit of like chill pill of it's not perfect, it's never going to be perfect, but it's good. And the like heat that's come over the last 4 or 5 years to me is very disconcerting.
Hmm.
um and we have debates about things that nobody else is debating about, which is fine. I think we should be able to debate those things, but I really hope we could respect each other's ministry even if we wouldn't do it that way.
Hmm.
um because we're different people in the same denomination in different contexts with different influences, but we all pretty much, I know people disagree with me on this, we are so close to each other. But once you start saying no, you are so far away, it just is really hard to take.
Hmm.
And so that's where I think, I hope in the next 25 years, we're like, okay, yeah, we're good. We're good. We're good. We have different voices. We have different influences. Fine. Some of them might be concerning, or there may be strains of those, or people go off in the wrong direction in any of them. Totally true. But, now I also think, let me say this, Ryan. I do think our court system is not amazing. So I would hope that in the next 25 years we would do some reformation on the way we deal with cases,
Yeah.
because I think we've sort of internalized a self-fulfilling prophecy that we're doing it right and we always do it right and we take care of each other. But we're not lawyers, and I just think we continually often mess all this up.
Mm.
So I would hope that there would be a little bit of a reform or a reform on our court systems, and I would say that would include women involvement. I don't know what that means exactly, but when you just have a bunch of dudes figuring stuff out who aren't lawyers, I think we could improve that process.
Yeah, I know Sean Lucas has called for synods in the PCA, and he didn't elaborate on what he meant by that, and I think that is something to consider. I think, though, others, and there's an overture, yes, it's up now, about having women involved in investigation processes, and there just seems to be a different perspective, that uh, some, and I would be in this camp, that we're a church. The church courts are comprised of elders, and so the elders will do the investigation. Now, that's not to preclude a civil investigation or a criminal investigation that might use other resources, but for a church court, we're going to make use of the church courts. And if we have to call in experts, we can call in experts, but the investigation should be done by the elders. But I certainly see your perspective that unordained people would have insights to give. It's just how we factor those in, how we deploy those resources.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think church courts are inherently fraught with problems.
Yeah, yeah,
It's always been true. It's still true. So, yes, you're right. But yes, we have to identify the problems with that approach,
yeah.
which seem numerous and easy to name and possible to mitigate against.
Duncan Rankin, I'm not sure if you know him, but I was involved in something awful in the congregation that I serve, and I'd asked a question on the Facebook group, or one of them, gave scant details, but enough to know, for Duncan Rankin to know that I was in over my head. And one of the things he said to me was, Ryan, the problem with pastors is they think they are lawyers and they think they are the police. You don't need
Both
to figure
false.
this out. Yeah, what you need to do is collect a record and send it on to the civil magistrate. And I was
Yeah.
so thankful that Duncan Rankin reached out, because we could have. They were just things and images and awful things that, like, I don't want to have to deal with this. And Duncan Rankin just, Ryan, you don't have to deal with that. Just send it on to the proper authorities. And I think that a lot of pastors, and maybe it's a younger pastor type of a situation, think that they don't get that same counsel. They don't get that counsel quickly enough. That just call the police. Now, thankfully, it wasn't involving a child or anything of that. And when the police were informed, they kind of said, eh. But I was glad that, I had that counsel that just call the police. Refer it to them. This is not something that you need to, store evidence for the next 500 years. But
Well, for sure. But even without, I just don't think we know what we're doing. We didn't have this
yeah,
class in seminary. We think we know what we're doing. We're not trained counselors. We're not trained lawyers. We mess up the BCO all the time.
oh yeah, I've seen that.
And we're
Yeah,
the ones who's supposed to know what the BCO, but much less anyone who doesn't know the BCO. And much less if you're woman coming in to a group of 5, 6 elder men. I
Mm,
mean, I just think it's all completely understandably not good.
mm. Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's
That
something I hope
ignorance.
we change in 25 years.
Yeah, yeah. And I
How
tell
about
you, the
now?
more,
Let's do
yeah,
it now.
yeah. But I tell you, the more I understand, the more I learn. I'm doing a officer training class now, and the more I study our polity, the more I love it. I see how biblical it is. Now it's nuanced. There's a huge learning curve, but I see the biblical principles that have been applied. And so if there's a way to teach that and to instill that, I think we could be a much more beautiful denomination in 25 years. But well, Doug, I really appreciate your time and thanks for coming on and sharing.
Thanks, Ryan.
Anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, thanks. I'm glad we can talk about Elizabeth. That's my main goal.
Yeah.
PCA politics, whatever. Um, but honoring Elizabeth
Mm.
and keeping her as the main focus is what's most important. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For additional resources or to make a donation, visit our website, jude3pca.org. As a reminder, the opinions and views expressed on the Westminster Standard podcast are not necessarily those of Jude 3 and the PCA. On this program, we try to bring you a variety of perspectives, and we do not edit our guests for content, but hope to foster greater dialogue and understanding as we promote the historic, old-school Reformed faith throughout the Presbyterian Church in America. We return to our weekly distribution schedule in May, so please join us again next week as we welcome back Teaching Elder George Sayor, as well as Dr. Jesse Ryan of the Center for Academic Faithfulness and Flourishing, and we'll be discussing the nature of higher education and the search for a Christian college. I'll talk to you then.